Hashem wants us to succeed. Hashem wants us to choose life. And Rashi will show us how that's not just simply saying choose life, but he's actually showing us exactly where we need to go and what we need to do. And that's all at the end of the parasha in Siyum HaSedra, where the pasuk tells us, Moshe Rabbeinu paraphrases Hashem saying, I've placed before you both life and the opposite, and you should choose life, in order that you and your descendants should all live. So Rashi quotes those two words, that you should choose life, and he says three things about it. What should be a very simple expression, choose life. Firstly, he says, when it says choose life, it means Hashem says, I'm showing you that you should choose the portion of life. Then he says, secondly, it's like a parable of a person who said to his child, choose the good portion out of the inheritance. And then the father shows him what that better portion is, and tells him, that's what you should choose for yourself. And then in case the parable isn't enough, Gimel, he brings Araya deruf von a pasuk. He brings a pasuk that illustrates this point, a pasuk we're familiar with from Tehillim, which says, Val ze nemar, this Rashi says, this is what the pasuk means when it says, Hashem enos chelki v'choisi, that the Eibishter is my portion. Atatoimich geirali, you support my lot. Rashi explains, yodi al geiral hatov, you literally placed my hand on a good portion, as if to tell me, you take it for yourself. So, uvacharta v'chaim is clearly, Rashi believes, something that has various components to it, and needs to be explained, and it's about being shown what to do, literally led by the hand and say, this is what you should take. Darf und verstehen. So we need to understand. What about those words, choose life, is so difficult? That Rashi has to even engage with an explanation at all. And then to go into an explanation that has so much detail? Why? Surely the meaning of the word choose life is ganz einfach. It's really simple, really clear. And as many of the other commentators who focus on the simplest explanation of the pasuk say, the Eibishter zogt on that the Eibishter is telling us als as good advice that we should choose life. And how do we do so? Through loving Hashem and listening to what Hashem says. It's good advice. Why does Rashi have to complicate things? So we need to know what about the words of V'charta v'chaim don't make sense that Rashi had to explain. Here's our first stab at it. A simple study of the pasuk will indicate that Rashi wants to clarify as of V'charta v'chaim that those words choose life is nitan onzag. It's not an instruction. And not only that, it's not even other Eitz HaTov like the other Pashtanei HaMikra say, that it should be good advice. It's a Boicha Zayin B'chaim, that you should, I'm telling you, listen to me, choose life. First of all, it's completely illogical to have an instruction, thou shalt choose life, because either way you look at it, it doesn't make sense. If we're completely unaware of the fact that that choice is the choice of life, then just clarify for me that is the way to life, and obviously I'm going to go there. You don't have to tell me to do it, just clarify that that's the source of life. And if that's the case, you don't need the instruction. Yet on the other hand, and if you're not clear about the fact that that's the path to life, then how does it help to make an instruction choose life? If I don't know what life looks like, if I don't know where I'm supposed to go, how does it help to instruct me to do it? If I don't know that is life, scream till you're blue in the face that I should choose life, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. So rather, what Rashi wants us to know is, as Rashi says, the concept over here is that Hashem saying, I'm showing you The fact that the next words are an instruction to us that we should love Hashem and listen to what He says, that's showing us how to choose the path of life. And that tells us, that is life. To love Hashem and observe the mitzvahs, that is life. Because the reality is that through the human experience, you don't always see the direct correlation between doing a mitzvah and following what Hashem wants and getting life, or chas v'shalom the opposite. So therefore, therefore he has to show us which is the way, which is the path to real life. As the pasuk says later on, you should do all these things and listen to the Torah, etc., because it is your life. So that's what Rashi is telling us. It's not an instruction, it's not even good advice, it's showing us where life lives, because obviously naturally then we would want to go there. And if then bring Rashi to illustrate that, Rashi has to firstly give us Aleph Amoshel. He gives us a parable. Like the father says to his son, choose this portion because it's really good. As a tata, where in that moshel, the father is not satisfied just to say, choose a good portion. No, but he takes and then he stands and then he says, this is it. This is what I intend for you to choose. And then over and above that, he brings a proof from a pasuk as the Eibishter is mamid eden al chelek hayofer, where the pasuk shows us that Hashem does for us exactly what that father did for his son, takes us to and sort of stands us in front of the good portion and says, this is what you should take. And that's how Rashi explains the pasuk. Hinachta yodi al gerel hatov. You literally placed my hand on the good portion, loymar ezeh kach lecha, as if to tell me that's what you should choose. Okay, so we get it. Rashi's big chiddush over here is that it's not an instruction to choose life. It's not even good advice to choose life. It's showing us where the choice of life is, where it lies, what you got to do. So that's great, but we still don't know why Rashi had to add so much detail and information. Let's unpack what all the questions are about the details and information. First of all, who needs a parable? A bit like a father who says to his son that this is the great portion, you should choose it. You could actually skip straight to what the parable represents, and it would be clear, to be understood. Remember, the purpose of a mashal is always to explain something I wouldn't know otherwise. Well, I would be able to extrapolate it without the mashal. As the Eibishter is mamid al chelek hayofer, just say simply, Hashem took us to and showed us where the best option and the best portion lies. In fact, the nimshal, what the parable is supposed to represent, is actually easier to understand than the parable itself. Because what the parable translates into is that we should choose to follow Torah mitzvahs because that's the path to life. It makes absolute sense that we need Hashem to show us this is the place of life. That is the best choice that you could possibly choose. Because because very often what happens in human experiences, as the pasuk says, sometimes it appears that the path of those who behave in contrast to Torah, they succeed. The Sifri says, the tzaddikim are the people who battle in this world and often have pain in this world. So therefore we need the Eibishter to tell us that's how things are in the here and now, but in the long run, the Rishoyim will be pushed aside and the tzaddikim will rejoice. So I need Hashem to show me, because it's not so obvious. But in the parable, which is about a father showing his son out of the inheritance, out of their estate, what's the most valuable physical thing? It's far easier to be able to work out what's nice and not so nice, valuable, not so valuable. You don't really need the father to take him by the hand and show him, okay, now this is what you should choose. So it's strange that Rashi should bring a mashal where actually what the mashal represents is easier to understand than the mashal itself. Second of all, base. In addition to how in the mashal the father takes the son and kind of stands him in front of the valuable assets, then Rashi says it's not good enough just that he shows him, but he says to him, this is what you should choose. So which implies as noch dem is that means that after he's firstly, as a father, advised him, choose the most precious assets, then shown him what those assets are. Still, you still got to do more than that, and spell it out verbally and say, this is what you should take. That doesn't make sense, isn't it? Move on. Firstly, simply, was is denoitekait, and then why do you have to say it? You've already shown him. And base, remember, a parable always has to align with whatever it's there to describe, which in this case is the pasuk of uvocharta b'chaim. Where do you see in uvocharta b'chaim that there's this additional layer of showing us and telling us that this is what is the best choice, the best option for us? Another question, Gimel, the siyum from Rashi. After the mashal, when Rashi goes to the pasuk from Tinim, the pasuk indicates that Hashem literally placed our hand and said, yeah, this is the good portion. The first of all, so what's Rashi doing over here? Saying, and this is what it means. Apirish and pasuk de Tilim. It's explaining a pasuk from Tehillim. He doesn't use an expression like as it says, which would indicate that the pasuk proves our point. He says, Ve'al ze nemar, which almost sounds like our point, explains the pasuk. If he had said, Ukamoy shenemar, something like that, then the pasuk would have been a source for our conversation. Why say Ve'al ze nemar? And Beis, the other question is, why do we have to know that it's specifically that, like, you placed my hand on the object and said this is the asset that you should take? Now, why are these questions? Because Rashi's job is to explain the simplest understanding of the pasuk he's explaining. This is not the place to start explaining a pasuk in Tehillim. This is the place to explain Parshas Nitzavim. And Beis, was du von hinachte yodi? And what's this concept of place your hand? What's that got to do with anything? What does it add? So it's all very well to say that Rashi wants us to understand that Uvocharta b'chaim is neither an instruction or good advice, but instead it's showing us the path towards that life. But all of the detail leaves us with a number of questions. So Debir Bozeh, to answer those questions, we have to first get to the core of what bothered Rashi in the first place and compel them to explain Uvocharta b'chaim at all. So the kasha was Rashi kommt fahren von mit seinem Pirush is, the question Rashi addresses here is as follows. Der Inyan was steht da in Pasuk. The theme and message of this pasuk, which is Hachayim v'amoves nosati lefonecha gomer. I'm giving you options, life and the opposite. And then I'm telling you, Uvocharta b'chaim, and you should choose life, that you and your children should sustain and survive. And as the pasuk shalach as well as the pasuk that's going to follow, which is the how, le'ava gomer, that you should love Hashem, lishmoy b'koilo gomer, that you should listen to Hashem, ki hu chayecha, because that is your life. All of that information, state shown, has already been quoted, unois firlech, and clearly in the Friedrich Psukim, in earlier Psukim, not far from this. How much clearer do you want than that? Hashem says, look, I'm giving you the options, good and life, or the opposite. Was the pshat derfun is, and the simplest meaning of that pasuk is azeh toli bezeh, and the one relies on the other. Im ta'aseh toiv, harei lecho chayim. If you do the right thing, you'll have life. Im ta'aseh ra, harei lecho moves, and the opposite will also be true. So we already know the information that the parasha is telling us here. The pasuk is denoch meforish, and then there the pasuk also went into the details. That I'm instructing you to love Hashem, and then it says as a result of that you will live and you'll increase in number. And then the opposite, and if you turn your heart, I warn you that various things are going to happen. We have all of that information already. The choices, how you make the choices. So that's what bothers Rashi. So why is the pasuk saying all of that again? Therefore Rashi concludes, as the chidush in teichen hakasav da, what this pasuk is adding that we don't already know in all those other previous references to the choices between life and the opposite, that is all is mudgosh in Tiferet v'charta b'chaim, is all highlighted in these two words: choose life. Vashtei nitfrir, because those are words we haven't seen before. We've seen that Hashem says there is the choice. Here we see Hashem telling us, make the choice. So what's unusual and insightful about that? So to explain that, Rashi gives us a parable. Like the father who says to his son, and he takes him and he places him in front of the great assets, and tells him, choose it for yourself. This parable shows us, as it is that there's a scenario that it is possible that you have actually shown him what the valuable assets that are worth having are, and still you still have to say it, please choose it. That's my suggestion to you. Choose it, as we'll explain. That's what's happening over here in our context. Rashi's expression that Hashem is saying, I'm showing you that you should choose life, von unser Pasuk, as illustrated in our Pasuk, is fits the part of the parable where after he's already shown the son where the good assets are, he still tells him to choose them. In other words, nachdem the Torah is mevoyer in the friedige psukim. That means that, in exactly like in the mashal, earlier in the Torah, in earlier psukim, we've already had the clarity azim ta'aseh tov harel chachayim of how it all works. If a person behaves well, they get life. Following that, there have to be the words, the verbal instruction, what you should do. Choose life. Now, the was me gefindt in mashal. If you consider what we see in the mashal as nachdem im git chelek yafe in sein nachla, that firstly you allocate, the father allocates him a good portion of the inheritance, and then after the allocation, the next thing he has to do is he has to actually position him, buy that asset. Is moving as nachla. We must obviously then be talking about the kind of inheritance where it's not so simple to know just by looking at things externally or superficially, which is the good part. So in other words, maybe it's a piece of art, and not everybody knows how to appreciate art. Maybe it's something that doesn't look like it's as valuable as it really is. That's why in the parable, the person who's giving the inheritance has to take the individual and say, this is actually the good portion. You don't know about these things. You don't know how to examine a gem or whatever it might be. Okay, so the mashal is clearly talking about the type of valuables that don't appear automatically valuable to the untrained eye. And parenthetically, by the way, that would also explain why the parable is not just a person giving a gift to an individual, but rather it's a father giving something to his son. Not to his colleague, his friend, his acquaintance. There's two factors to this. The zicherkeit from Makabel, as the notion is in Maimon al Chelek HaYafa, how does the recipient know that the person is actually giving him the best choice, the best assets? How does he know? So he's verbunden mit dem, was zwei Sachen. It depends on two things. First, he has to know, as by notion is klar was is the Chelek HaYafa. First, he has to know that the person himself knows how to tell. In other words, whoever's going to give me this gift, or in this case, the inheritance, I need to know that they know how to assess if something is truly valuable or not. That's the first piece of information. And second of all, I have to know, based the notion is that the person giving this gift or the inheritance cares for my well-being. It's not out to trick me or cheat me. And it's obviously because I know absolutely that person has my best interests at heart. That's how I know that when they say this is the best portion, it must be the best portion. On the vados, and so that clarity in the tzvei pratim, in both sides, that person knows what they're talking about and that they have my best interests at heart, they're both expressed and highlighted in the two components of this parable. Aleph, the chelek is nachalosi. that the father tells his son, it's my portion, it's my assets that I know them intimately. I spent time, I researched them, I found them, I traded them. Secondly, Egites livnoi, who's he giving it to? His son. There's no question that if there's anybody in the world that a person wants to give the best to, it's his own son. So Rashi needed to clarify that for us, because it's relevant to how the parable will translate into our conversation. When we talk about what Hashem is offering us as the path to life. In order that it should be clear to us as Chaim und Tov seinen tolui ze bezeh, that there is a relationship between doing the good, which is to serve Hashem, and thereby getting Chaim, getting life, which represents, of course, all the bracha that comes with life. That is that the fact that they're completely interrelated, even though that's not always apparent to the human eye. So like in the mashal, we say the Jew has to contemplate two concepts, like the son has to acknowledge two facts about his father's gift to him. Aleph, die Welt ist nachlosi, firstly to know that the entire world, all of creation is the Eibishter's property, von Eibishter. He is the creator and director of the world. Und darüber weiß was ist der richtige Weg von Chaim. Therefore, the Eibishter is obviously the one who knows the ultimate path to life. Second of all, we're the Eibishter's children. So obviously, the Eibishter only wants the best for us, and therefore we can trust. When he says, go down that road to get life, that's the road to go. But as we've already discussed, and all those things, it's not always apparent that the path of Torah and mitzvahs is the path of goodness and life and bracha. And therefore we have to trust the presenter of the gift, in this case the Eibishter. Says Muvan, for that reason it makes sense as that's why the giver, the Eibishter, is not just going to be satisfied with the fact that he shows us what's right, what's good, what's valuable. No, he's but he's got to encourage us, even after showing us. And he therefore repeats to us, we should make sure to take the good stuff. And that's why in Rashi's mashal, the father tells the child, please choose that for yourself. That's exactly how it plays out in our pasuk. After the Eibishter told us in previous parashiyos, Torah is good, mitzvahs are good, that's the path to life, that's going to bring you bracha. And the one depends on the other. The only way to get the bracha is by doing the good. That's the part where he puts us in line for the good stuff. We still need a push from on high. Over is the push. Choose life. That you will live. You and your children. That's the part where the Eibishter says, trust me and make the clever choice. Now, we can still query Rashi or query the whole mashal. Because we'll say the parable doesn't exactly fit with what it is meant to represent. Because in the mashal, we get it. When the father says to his son, listen to me, trust me, choose this piece of this portion of assets, we get it. It makes sense. First of all, we're talking about a human father and a physical asset. For which reason, even if the child can't work out based on his own insight that this is actually where the wealth lies, but at least he has a sense that his father knows what he's talking about, because his father's a human like he is, and the portion is physical like he would enjoy. If the child doesn't really have an insight into the true nature of his father's assets, to know which is the best part of their estate, so he trusts his father. That's not going to work out exactly the same way in the application of Hashem and us. First of all, we cannot necessarily see that this is what's good for us. Very often, what the Torah tells us, people shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know that this is good for us. People don't always see that as you do mitzvahs, straight away you have all the good physical needs and brachos in life that you want. So, and maybe the person thinks, or maybe it's even true, that the life we're talking about is not physical life, but it's life in the next world. Now, but beyond that, sometimes you see the opposite. The child doesn't have this problem. The child doesn't look at the box filled with whatever items it is and say, those are bad things. He just doesn't know how to value them. We look around the world and we say, the world's telling a story that's opposite to what you're promising me, God. We see that the path of the wicked is successful. As Shlomo HaMelech says, that the woman who is an inappropriate woman drips with honey. Her lips drip with honey. In other words, it's very attractive. The things that are not allowed are very attractive. Which means that we feel physical pleasures in a very tangible, real way. But what Shlomo HaMelech says that at the end, that same attractive element will become bitter as gall, or as lana, whatever, it's bitter roots. It's not an inivasa gleibt. That's something I believe, I don't know. Or maybe I understand intellectually, but I don't know it viscerally. And we can zeros. So how does it help? That the Eibusha tells us via Moshe in the Torah of choose life. But to mention to oplosen die Sachen von Chaim Gashman, that should be enough to convince a person to relinquish the pleasures and investment of physical things, and instead adopt what the Torah considers to be good, Torah mitzvahs. It's not exactly like the mashal. The mashal, it's much more simple. Show me it's good, explain to me that it's good, I know that it's good. When the Eibusha makes all these promises, I don't necessarily know that that's how it works. I don't see it. Therefore, if there is Rashi Mamshich, that's why Rashi has to add another layer to the conversation. Therefore, there has to be the pasuk in Tilim that says, the Eibusha is my portion. As Rashi explains, like you put my hand onto the good portion and said, this is what you need to take. In other words, this concept of the Eibusha saying, choose life, is not just a statement. It has an impact. It supports our portion. It is like the Eibusha putting our hand onto an element and saying, this is the good element. In other words, the Eibusha weist on Yidden an imor lachem in gashmius dem gerel hatov. The Eibusha shows us in physical terms the goodness of what he promises us. To the point that we can actually see with our own eyes, at least sometimes, and that we actually see it. We actually see somebody does something right, and they actually get brachos for it. Just like you could actually put your hand onto something and feel it, you can actually feel it with your hand. That reinforces for us that doing the right things is the path of life, is the path of goodness. So occasionally you'll see a person does this and a miracle happens in their life, or they give tzedakah and they get 10 times back, or whatever the particular case is. It doesn't necessarily happen all the time, but from time to time the Eibusha shows us these things, so will help drive the message home. With that insight, we can detect a very nuanced shift in Rashi's language. In Moshel, when he gives the parable, that the father says to the son, he says, choose that for yourself, because it's good. On a Nimshal, whereas when he translates it into in Oistach from Pasuk, Hashem nos chelki v'chosi gomer, when he explains the Pasuk about what Hashem does for us, there Hashem says to us, Zokter loimar ezekach l'cha. He doesn't say choose it, he says take this for yourself. What's the difference between saying choose the good portion or take the good portion? V'bal dezirus von taten. In the Mashal, the father's encouragement, after he already establishes for him what the good portion is nor bedibra, it's only words. So he's saying, this is what you should do. Ultimately, the choice is the child's choice. Is he going to listen to his father or not? So therefore, the father says to him, make the right choice. He wants the child to choose what is indicated to the child is the better portion. But when you're talking about the Eibishter's words, choose life, says Rashi, that's like a physical action. It's like putting our hand onto the item that we can feel it and see its value. That means the girl that means that our good portion has already been allocated and chosen, and connected to us, the individual Jews. It's given, it's allocated, all we're going to do is take it home. We don't have to make the decision, is it what I want or not? That decision's already made, just take it. That's why Rashi says, the expression is, he placed my hand onto it, to say, take it. He didn't place my hand and say, he placed my hand to say, meaning the action is the message. Because the main thing is the placing of the hand, that making it tangible and real. And the message of this is what you should take, it's just a natural outcome. In other words, the father speaking to the son says to the son, now you've got to work out what to do next. The Eibishter empowering us is saying, here it is, now just take it. In dem Shine Anal in the Shein Rashi Zech Merumas and in Halacha, what's interesting about this is that these two words, choosing versus taking, actually have a legal implication. Before we can get to that legal implication, we're going to observe one other thing about Rashi. That's quite interesting. We switch from the word chelek, which is a portion, to goyrol, which is effectively something that you get in an irrational way, right? A goyrol is a lottery, which is effectively irrational. Was die Kavone in dem is zum Ramme sein, as the Ofen Abchira von Iden in Chelek HaChaim is v'achaluk al pi goyrol, that hints to the fact that our choice to do the right thing, to follow the path of life, is similar to the allocation of an item or a portion through a raffle process. And that would also help us to understand the distinction between how it's stated in the mashal and in the nimshal. Beroilecha, choose, and kachelcha, take. Because that's the difference between a father telling and advising his child, choose this, and a girl compared to a lottery, where the Eibishter places my hand, like the Eibishter chooses that I win the lottery. So here's where it has a legal implication. What happens if you have partners who now want to split up the assets that they share using a lottery? Halten Kamer Rishonim, there are a number of Rishonim will argue, as the girl is nor mevorer velchel chelek yeder von seidaf bakum. That if they use a lottery, the lottery will only clarify who really deserves what. But so let's say they pull in, let's say there's two partners and there's 10 assets. So they pull out, 5 go to you, 5 go to you based on a lottery. So the Rishonim say it doesn't yet belong to you. Even though you've pulled the lottery, you actually have to make a formal kinyan so that it becomes yours. Yet, when they divided the land of Israel in the time of Yehoshua, which was also based on a lottery, as is described, that there was both the lottery system and there was the Urim v'Tumim, which was, of course, a Ruach HaKodesh system, halten alle, all Rishonim agree, every person owned their portion of Israel just because of the lottery without having to make a formal kinyan. And we'll see that reflected in our story. When it's the father telling his son, this is what you should have, then what he's telling his child, this is the good portion, is just to clarify for him that it's the good portion. So therefore, and therefore he has to tell him, you got to choose it for yourself. Basically, you got to take ownership. Whereas in the application of the mashal in how it refers to Hashem and us, is the Amira von Eibishter when the Eibishter says choose life, that's not no mevordim chelek hachayim. That doesn't just tell us which way to go. Okay, I'm advising, go that way. Nas tut uf as the gerel hatov niknet zum Eden. The moment the Eibishter says uvacharta v'chaim, the path of goodness is already ours. All we have to do is follow it. As the words were in the Nimshal, that's like the Eibishter placing a hand already onto the asset and saying, take it. It is already yours. You don't need a kinyan to formalize it. Now, all of this has a deep spiritual message as well. Rashi expressed in the so-called wine element of depth that Rashi offers us in his explanations. The fact that we've now identified two elements of choosing life. One is Chelek HaYofeh, that there's a good portion, and that is Beroi Lecha, we have to choose. And then there's Goyrel HaTov, there's a good lot, which is Kach Lecha, that you get to take. They represent two ways that a Jew could reach the point of choosing life, which we're supposed to do. Ein oifen is one possibility, that the person sits down and rationally works out that this is actually the best thing to do, because the Eibishter is infinite, so whatever he offers me is obviously going to outlive whatever the world has to offer me, whatever the particular cheshbon is. When a person follows an intellectual process that brings them to the conclusion, I should do what Hashem wants, we call that a good portion. It's explained in various places that the concept of a chelek, of a portion, refers specifically to serving Hashem in a rational way. So when a person chooses to follow Torah mitzvahs based on that intellectual process, we call it beror, clarifying and choosing. There are two options. They are both real options. Each one has something about it that is attractive that the other one doesn't have. Because if not for that, anders is doch nicht shaykh die Sache von beror kleiben, then there would be no choice. If it was obvious, then it's not a choice. So we now use our intellectual prowess to say, I'm choosing X and not Y, even though Y has certain advantages which, unfortunately, I have to relinquish. That's one way. The zweite Oifen is the other way that we get to commit ourselves to Torah mitzvahs. That's where we choose to do what Hashem wants, not because we calculated that it's in our best interests, but using a choice process that is super rational. In which case what we get is not called a good portion, but a good lot. As we well know, the concept of a lottery is not rational. It's beyond the intellect. If a person takes that approach, that my dedication to my Yiddishkeit is not based on any intellectual understanding, it's just absolute. That is expressed not in choosing, in taking. That zweite Chelek because the alternative doesn't exist There is no possibility of choosing the other way. Und die Avodah besteht nicht mehr wie in nehmen dem Gerel Hatov, so my only Avodah is now to take the path that I'm committed to. Wenn man das verstehen, we'll understand it better, like dem was Chassidus is mevore, based on what Chassidus explains as derech reshoim tzleicha, the concept that, and this is something that Chassidus speaks about at length, the fact that bad people do well, or generally the fact that that which is distant from godliness has vitality, is mitzad bechinas makif. That is all a result of a more abstracted, removed in a sense, higher level of godliness. And that's why it's just flows. Makif, it doesn't get down into the details, deserve, don't deserve, how much, it just gives on a cheshma without calculation. Whereas any vitality that is shared with anything that is holy is from the or penimi, that comes from a very inner, deeper, consolidated, focused energy, or bekeli dafka, the kind of energy that has to live in a structured environment, which is why it has to be calibrated specifically. And that's the greatness of Jews and being Jewish. And that we choose to be connected to Hashem, because in Kiddusha, we choose that we want to be involved in holiness, which means we're willing to give up all of that plentiful flow that the rest of the world seems to enjoy without any limits. That's how it is on the other side. And we prefer to choose a more limited flow that comes from a holy place than a greater flow that comes from an ugly place. How do we do that? Why do we do that? There are two possible explanations. One explanation is not a fisha. I know that the Rishonim are going to do so well, but only in the short term. And after then it's all going to disappear. Like Shlomo HaMelech says, it's all sweet in the beginning and bitter at the end. Whereas on the other hand, maybe tzaddikim don't have such incredible success in the here and now, but in the long run they're going to be overwhelmed with goodness. Kamaimer, like the famous Gemara with Rabbi Kiva and his friends, if the Romans who go against Hashem have such great success and bracha, can you only imagine what is in store for those who fulfill Hashem's wishes? So das is the b'chira pitam adas. That's a logical choice to do what Hashem wants. And machta cheshbon, person does a whole audit, and in his conclusion, that it's actually in my interest to serve Hashem and to do that which is holy. That is all was in Merumas in the Meshtanim from Rashi. The first thing Rashi quotes, Chelek hayofe beroi lecha, that you choose, using your intellectual faculties, the better option. But then there's another perspective completely based. It's not about now, it's not about later, it's not about how much. The limited flow comes from holiness. Das is pnimius ratzon elyon. That's what the Eibishter really cares about. That's what the Eibishter really wants. Nicht wie die Ashpah zu Klippe, which is completely unlike whatever massive tsunami of goodness seems to flow in the direction of the Klippa world, but it's like something you toss over your shoulder with complete disinterest. That's why the person chooses holiness. Das heißt, dass die Ashpah von Kedusha ist in ein Öfen von Be'er Pemnei Melachayim. If I'm going to have energy flow, bracha that comes into my life, and it comes from Hashem face to face with radiance and happiness, even if it's quantitatively less, it's absolutely valuable and precious to me. Vidariba is doing Klippa far more precious than whatever the Klippa world may have to offer. Dos is nita bchira b'cheshbon. That's not a rational conclusion to make this choice. No l'mayla mitam v'das. That's something which is completely super rational. Dos v'sa'id vil be'etzem elikus mitzad b'chinas gerel shebeneshama. That is an indication of the fact that in his essence and core, the Jewish person only wants connection to Hashem because his neshama is a gerel, part of the lot of Hashem. Und der Rebbe is in dem nicht scheich dürfen von Bereulach, so there's no room over here for making a choice. Warum mit Zadem Adegen Neshama is jede Sache ist Elikus melechatchil nicht teufes mocken. Because from this perspective, from that vantage point of the depth of the Neshama, anything that is not godliness doesn't even enter the equation. Not the gerel hatoiv kach lecha. There's only one thing to take it. Connection to God. As is das bechinas gerel, as zol das bechinas gerel arabtragen in apnimius, which basically means to take this very deep-seated but abstract level of being one with Hashem's essence and make it real to myself. Biz machshava, dibur, or ma'aseh, to translate it in how I think, and how I speak, and how I behave. Afal b'chein steht in Pasuk. Hachayim v'amoves nosati lefonecha gomer. Yet what does the Pasuk say? The Pasuk says you've got choices. There's life for the opposite. And choose. The Pasuk clearly is talking about the first lower approach where you've got to choose which way you're going to go. So you're going to choose life, you're going to choose the other thing. And that's also something Rashi illustrates to us by saying Ve'al ze nemar chule. It's about this that the pasuk in Tehillim says, that the principle of Hashem giving us that clarity where there's only one thing to take says no. Rashi is alluding to the fact that uvacharta b'chaim also incorporates within it the option where there are no options, where you just take what is yours. Which, as Rashi explains to us, is only rarely expounded in Tehillim. It's not clear in our pasuk. What's clear in our pasuk is uvacharta b'chaim, but embedded within uvacharta b'chaim is the next level, the higher level. Now, how does that work? The explanation is this: the minyan from that principle that Hashem says, "I'm giving you options, and now choose the healthy option." As those of Said Kleiptois Chelek HaChaim is the idea that a person actually makes a personal free choice to do the right thing and to choose life. There are two facets to that. Aleph, der Sheresh ha'inyan, von dem was is Beicher in Elikus. If I go right to the core of why would a Jew choose to connect to Hashem, the core reason why a Jew chooses God is because the essence of the Jew is godly. One with Hashem's essence. And the chavshus habechira in their darga, when you're at that deep, high level, then the freedom of choice, choshas is nicht shaykh zu sagen, as the etzem and neshama vet beiche sein epis antish velikus chas v'shalom. It's not classical choice. Classical choice is there really are two options, and I really have to call on the power of choice to select one. When I'm talking about the essence of the neshama that intersects with the essence of God, there the freedom of choice meant as the bechira veiskashos von eden elikus is nit mitzad hahechach hatayim u'mayla. That means that I'm at a point where I've chosen God without any external influence or pressure. I'm free of influence. Was done is, and that means Aleph discussions. Was done is Aleph discussion d'Hagbola, because if there was some kind of external pressure, then my connection to Hashem would have its limitations. Lefiatam v'amayla, depending on what the external pressure or external compulsion was. Base is niken emes bechira chavshes, and if I ever make a choice because there's something that's influencing my choice, it's not a free choice. Because if it makes sense, or there's a great advantage to a particular, well, then it's not a choice. Then it's sold itself. Nor valazoi is the ratzon bechira von etzem haneshama mitzad atzmo. We are describing over here that at the core and essence of the neshama, this is everything about what the essence of the neshama is and therefore wants. And therefore, because the neshama is not making this choice based on some particular attraction, well, then nothing outside of godliness plays a part in this choice. Because this is a part of me that's not open to what you're going to try sell me. So if the world is going to try sell me something different to Elikos, this is a part of me that's not open to salespeople. So it's an absolutely free choice based on the essence of who I am. And therefore nothing in the world can convince me otherwise. And nothing in the world is convincing me to do this. It is me. I'm not being told to choose. Then there's the next level, based. The Gilui von der Bechira in Elikos is in Seichel Ha'adam. That's how things operate at the depth of the neshama. But then it translates into the conscious intellectual experience of the human being in human form. How can you tell that somebody has chosen to connect to Hashem using free choice? You can only tell, you can only identify it, you can only see it when he's living in an environment that offers an alternative. So, the essence of the neshama doesn't need the challenge of an alternative to make an absolute choice that I want to connect to Hashem. But how do I know, when I observe the Jewish person, how do I know that he's actually chosen God? Well, when there's a challenge, when there's an alternative. And then, in spite of the alternative and as attractive as it looks, he still chooses life. On dos is shaykh dafkin seichel ha'adam. That dilemma and the resolution of that dilemma only happens in the human mind. Because only the human mind is able to identify the potential advantage of either side of the choice. And nevertheless come to choose life. Und der Pfarrer wird gesagt im Pasuk Achaim v'amovis nosati lefonecha goyim uvacharta b'chaim. That's why the Pasuk specifies there are choices of life or the opposite, and you choose life. Because the Pasuk is describing how you actually serve Hashem in real life. In real life, you have to engage your mind. And when you engage your mind, there are choices, and you have to make the right choice. No, Rashi, but Rashi in his brilliance, which also incorporates the deepest parts of Torah, is he illustrates to us that within those words of V'charta b'chaim, which you could have read so superficially as make the right choice, embedded in that is something far deeper. There's this absolute commitment to what is right, illustrated by literally having your hand on the asset and knowing this is what you should take. The pnimius v'amitus von der Bechira in Elikos in der Darga von Tam v'das der Bechira bepoel is dos eich the Bechira von Bechiras Gerel shebin Neshama. Rashi is illustrating the pasuk that speaks about uvacharta b'chaim, the real life dilemma and resolution of the dilemma of what to choose, is actually just a manifestation of a far deeper connection of the neshama beyond what is described in this pasuk, but is alluded to in the pasuk in Tehillim. That's the real driver for that choice. The goyrel dimension of the soul, etzem neshama in Elikos, that has absolute connection to Hashem and therefore absolute choice in Hashem. Which completely rejects not only the choice of, but even the option of the opposite. Leaving a person just with the simple need to take what is available to them. Now we understand why this is the issue that would be discussed in Parashas Nitzavim, a parasha was kohen la'olam koydem Rosh Hashanah, a parasha that always immediately precedes Rosh Hashanah, and considering that everything always follows and is consolidated by its conclusion is moving us Yeshaychus from Parshas Nitzavim to Rosh Hashanah. That helps us to understand that the link between Parshas Nitzavim and Rosh Hashanah is nor in Ascholas HaParasha. It's not only the first part of the Parasha we always talk about, which is clearly related to Rosh Hashanah. Atem Nitzavim Hayoim Goyim, that you stand this day referring to Rosh Hashanah, Noich in Siyum HaParasha, but it's also at the end of the Parasha too. Why? Because what is Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is this man v'mizma'ira d'meibisham beicha zayin diden. Rosh Hashanah is the time that we, so to speak, stimulate or rouse from Hashem to choose us as His special people. V'mizoktum ebet fatkiyas, like we say in Kapitel Mem Zayin, just before we blow the shofar. Yiv chalones nachlosenus ken Yaakov Hashem yivselo. Hashem, choose for us, choose us as your portion, as your inheritance, the greatness of Yaakov that you have always loved. Was in der Bechira zayin dort zwei Inyanim aderech hanal Sif Yudalef, and Eibishter's potential choice of us reflects the two possibilities of choice that we have to do Torah mitzvahs. The shoyresh habechira is dos v'satzmus yisbarach is beichen neshamis Yisrael nit mitzad hatam. The real core and root and cause of the Eibishter choosing us is because we have this intersection between our essence and His essence, and there is no option. From that perspective, it's impossible to switch us out for another nation. Says Yisrael Malko Bilchoi Doi. We're absolutely one with the King. There's no room for anybody else to even feature. That's the core of what's driving Rosh Hashanah. And how do we see it in real terms, in real life? Is in an oifen fun v'yisen v'skula mikol ha'amim goymer. Is the Eibishter telling us that we'll be His treasure from all the other nations, implying that there are other nations that exist. And yet, to me, they're meaningless. Which helps us to see how beloved we are to Hashem. So just like until the dilemma exists in our life, we don't know how deep our neshama goes in its connection to Hashem. Until the possibility of other nations exists in our world, we don't know how deep Hashem's love goes for us in choosing us to be His people. Now, Vibaldas Rosh Hashanah explains at length that the whole purpose and concept of Rosh Hashanah is that everything restores to its default pre-creation state. Therefore, everything has to be regenerated from its absolute source, because nothing exists for that moment as Rosh Hashanah comes in. Everything's got to be reignited from the source, which means that Hashem choosing us has to be re-stimulated from Hashem's essence. And that is achieved not in a vacuum. When Hashem created the world originally, things just happened because He said so. But now every year on Rosh Hashanah, He places the ball in our court and says, you have to do your avodah, and you have to choose life. Nitnon mitzad tam vadas, and your choice of life shouldn't only be rational, mitzad b'chinas geirel sheben neshama, etzem neshama, but it should be a reflection of and an expression of the essence of your soul. When we illustrate openly that we have chosen Hashem as our God, that reveals how Hashem has chosen us as His chosen people. And that should be revealed down in the practical world of a toiv hanira v'hanigla, in goodness that can be seen and that is revealed to all of us. And only good, b'toiv hanira v'hanigla.